What's up guys, Dave with Miracle Canine Training. I made a post the other day asking, how can I help you? We talked a little bit about, the content we're putting out, looking for ideas on different forms of content we can make, different questions people had, different things they were struggling with and stuff. We got a huge, overwhelming response of questions on this. So what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna be doing like a 2-part answer series on this. I'm gonna be taking some of these questions and I'll be using those as ideas to make new content, but I also wanted to make sure that I went through and I answered all of them individually for you guys to make sure you guys had the information you were looking for this. Part 1 here is going to be the questions on the Facebook page, right? So if you had commented on our Facebook post on this, all of your answers are gonna be in this video. So this is gonna be a speed round. We're gonna burn through these. There's only a couple on the Facebook one, there's more on the Instagram, so this one's gonna be a little bit shorter. So anyways, first question from Jordan. Getting a dog's attention when overstimulated in a new environment, right? Very common stuff here. Overstimulation and dogs just not listening when they're distracted is everybody's problem really, right? If you break it down in a nutshell. And it's something that it's interesting. People will call all the time and they'll be like, my dog knows sit and they know down and they know bed and they know come and they know all of these different commands and stuff like that. And they're usually good with them unless they're distracted. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's normal, right? I would say 99.5% of dogs that come into our training center have some degree of understanding of like sitting down and the basics of what we want them to do and what we don't want them to do, just because we've been pretty clear with them. We usually tell dogs no when they jump up on us. We usually tell dogs sit when we give them a treat, or we use down command to get them into a down or any of those types of things. The problem always is that we don't have the communication established in conjunction with those individual commands to be able to enforce them when they're distracted, which is why everything goes out the window when you're in a distracting environment. So our training is not so much about the word sit and the word down and the word bed, but it's, do we have multiple forms of communication to be able to get the dog to do those things? So what are those forms of communication? We have food, right? Can the dog follow food to get into position, right? We have the leash. Does the dog understand with only the leash getting into a sit, a down, a bed coming to us? The e-collar, have we conditioned in the e-collar to mean all of these different things? And what we try to do with all of the dogs that come to our training centers, we try to make sure the dog knows food getting into a position, leash getting into a position, e-collar getting into a position. That way, we have different degrees and intensities to be able to enforce those commands around different types of distractions, right? So if I've conditioned my leash in with the word sit, for example, and I'm outside on the street and I give my dog a sit command and my dog looks at me and says, I don't really want to do it. I don't have to repeat myself. I have a form of communication to be able to then get the dog into that sit without ever needing to repeat myself. In higher distractions, you have the e-collar established in conjunction with that sit. If I've paired in stimulation, meaning get into a position, stimulation, meaning get into a position, then once the dog hits a point where they tell me I don't want to do it because I'm distracted by this dog, this person, this bike, whatever, right? I can give my dog a bigger, more motivating correction with that e-collar to snap their attention out of it, right? Where I see a lot of people go wrong is because there's a lot of conflicting information out there on attention, right? The amount of people I've had come in that have, told me that they've been to, different positive only trainers or things like that, and they've spent all this time working on like look, right? Eye contact, eye contact, eye contact. The problem is you're doing you're teaching it in an artificial way. You know what I mean? The dog is not giving you attention because they care about what you're saying. They're giving you attention solely because they want the reward. And when you're relying solely on rewards to teach those things, well, no matter what, 100% of the time, you're always gonna run into something in the environment that is more rewarding to the dog than whatever you have for them, right? So you have to have a means of being able to communicate an incorrect choice, and the more your dog cares about those consequences you're giving for incorrect choices in these cases, and the more that you have the communication established to be able to work through those different things, you're gonna get organic attention. The amount of times we've started leash training and I've never said a word to the dog before, and I've just kind of provided little consequences here and there for not paying attention or for sniffing something or this or that, and then the dog magically starts just looking up at me and giving me focus and giving me eye contact and giving me attention. The owners are like, oh my gosh, they're looking at you. That's amazing. I've never seen that before. And it's because I've finally done something that makes the dog care about me in that environment, right? So what you need to do is you need to figure out what that thing is gonna be that gets your dog to care about. Again, I tend to rely on e-collars for this kind of stuff, but you could use leashes, you could use pet correctors, you could use bonkers, you could use any number of things. But what you need to do is you need to go into that environment you're having issues in. You need to take a form of communication that you've already taught, whether it's the leash, whether it's the e-collar, whatever it may be, and you need to then increase the motivation on that tool until the dog cares more about that than it does about the surrounding environment, right? I know you just started your e-collar training because you've been messaging me about that a little bit. So you're probably gonna need to have one thing, whatever it may be, whether it's sit or recall or any number of those things, established first very, very clearly. And then you're gonna need to, like I said, take it into a new environment and work that specific thing. All right, next question here. This is from Ann Tatum. What age do puppies start formal training? We've been working with 11-week-old Bouvier, but he's pretty stubborn. Typically, I do two types of training, one-on-one sessions and I do board and trains. As far as my one-on-one sessions are concerned, I start them right around 12 weeks. I used to do them a little bit younger than that, but the reason why I like the 12-week mark is because the dog is kind of past a lot of those like real puppy stages where you can't really do a whole lot with them, and you know, you're really focused on just getting them used to the leash and getting them used to potty training and stuff like that. And you're starting to get to a place where they're a little bit more kind of independent, they're a little bit more curious and stuff, and you could start putting a little bit more pressure on them with the leash and stuff to get them to do things. But they're still young enough where they don't have any ingrained habits. We're able to manipulate them fairly easily. They usually have pretty good established food drive at that point. So for my one-on-one classes, I tend to start right around the 12-week mark is the earliest that I'll start them. And usually by the end of the program, the dog is about 5 or 6 months old, and we typically have them just about fully off-leash trained. So we'll do that for one-on-one classes. Our board and train programs don't start until the dog is about 5.5 to 6 months old, because in the board and train format, naturally, we're working in a 4-week time frame as opposed to over the course of 10 weeks. So we're kind of crunching a lot of information and a lot of training into a lot shorter of a span. And when you have a 12-week-old dog, you know, you gotta figure they're only 16 weeks old by the end of that board and train, which is not obviously old enough for them to have anything proofed or really understood just yet. I know there's trainers out there that will do board and trains with dogs that are like 12 weeks old, 14 weeks old. I don't agree with it. I do not think it's beneficial. I have seen a lot of those companies, especially locally, that will offer those dogs very, 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 very frequently need further training past that point, or full more board and trains, because you're just rushing things. You're putting way too much pressure on a young dog to get them to do things where I don't even think that their brain is fully functioning enough to be able to gather that info. So to answer the question, 12 weeks for one-on-one sessions, 5.5 to 6 months for board and train programs. Next question from Kim Clark. How to calmly greet new guests coming into the house. So as far as guests coming into the house, I have there are two big things that I'll do to work on things like this. So how I handle it with my personal dogs is I utilize a command that my dog is very good with. Usually I'll use the bed stay because it's the easiest, it's the most clear in the house, and it's the most stable of the positions we'll work on. I will have my bed in eyesight of my front door, usually in my living area or something if it's a clear shot. I will put my dog into a bed stay. I will go let my guest into the house, and I will enforce that bed stay heavily to make sure that first and foremost, when this person is coming in, my dog, before they ever go and say hi to the person, can practice impulse control around the person. That means big correction for breaking it, and making sure that they're staying calm on that bed until that person is in the house. Once a person is in the house, I'll usually do 5 to 10 minutes of duration on that bed. I'll let my dog just kind of get used to the fact that somebody's there, get some of the wiggles out on the bed, see him start to kind of settle down a little bit. And then once my dog is calm, I'll release my dog. At that point, I pick one very specific thing that I do not want the dog to do, in this case, jumping. That's usually what people mean when they ask, how does my dog greet guests nicely or politely, right? Usually they're asking, like, how do I get my dog to stop jumping on my guests? Same deal, you gotta have a way to correct the dog, you gotta have a way to have a consequence for it. I use an e-collar for it, it's the easiest tool. Again, guys, be aware of the fact that when we're working on stopping behavioral issues, because that's 90% of the questions that I get when I do these types of Q&As. When we're working on stopping behavioral issues, the idea is we are trying to create an inhibition, right? We're not trying to just say, please stop, temporarily stop for a second. I need you to stop doing it just for a minute. We are trying to say never. Do not jump. Do not put your paws on people. You should not like putting your paws on people. If you really want to get blunt about it, I want you to be remotely scared of jumping on people, right? So make sure your levels are high enough for that, right? One and done it. I always say you want to squash this behavior. Set your e-collar really, really high. Give a correction for it, stop the behavior so you don't have to do it all the time. I think that 1 or 2 big corrections for stopping jumping is way more nice and way more humane on the dog than doing 10 corrections at a naggy level where you're just kind of pissing them off and irritating them, right? So again, 2-step process, bed stay for the first 5 to 10 minutes of the guest coming in the house to make sure you have impulse control around the person. This helps let the energy settle down in the room a little bit. This helps to get the dog into a little bit calmer of a state of mind when you go to release them, making them less likely to do the thing we don't want them to do, which is jumping. And then release them and correct really firmly with the jumping. And with that combination of things, that is like the money shot for it. That is how I do it with my dogs. That is how I recommend my clients do it with their dogs. And that's how we get success with it. This one is from Michelle Murphy. I am struggling getting my 19-year-old puppy in and out of my SUV. He's afraid to get in and he's afraid to get out if I can actually get him into the vehicle. He's close to 50 pounds, so not an easy feat for me. He's been abused, so he's afraid of absolutely everything but getting more confident. I'm trying to build the confidence, but also trying to be firm, inconsistent. Just clarifying, I'm not sure, or trying to be firm, but you're being inconsistent with the 2 or what the deal is. Anyways, all right, Michelle. Okay, so I know Michelle. Michelle's done training with her other dog here. You have a 19-week-old puppy. This is really young, and I've seen you say this virtually every time I've talked to you about this dog so far, and I know you're coming in for training, so we're gonna have this conversation in training as well, but the first and foremost thing that you gotta do is drop the abuse part. 19 weeks old, even if he has had abuse in the past, which I'm not discrediting and I'm not denying, right? It's not long enough of a period of time where he's going to have long-lasting trauma from it. It just isn't. The dog is too young for that to happen. I always tell everybody that kind of, talks about how their dog may have a history of abuse or thinks that they do, and a lot of times it's speculation from people. They see things like a dog shying away from people, or they see things like the dog being really timid in certain areas and stuff, and we always equate it to abuse and trauma. The dog has had something bad that's happened to them that causes them to do it. I am here to tell you that 99% of the time, and this is generalized now, Michelle, to everybody, 99% of the time, if there has been trauma or abuse, it has almost nothing to do with the dog's behavioral issues, right? I have seen dogs that owners have had since they've been 8 weeks old, right? Like literally born fresh out of the breeder in a fine situation into the house that have acted like people have just beat the shit out of it, right? Like really acted like they were terrified of people, have had all of this trauma happen to them. And I've also seen dogs that I know with 100% certainty have had years of trauma and abuse because we know the history of the dog, we know the shelters they came from the dog, we know the situations that they have been pulled from, and some of those dogs are the sweetest, most loving, most stable, best trained dogs that I've ever met in my life, right? The thing that everybody needs to realize is the abuse and the trauma doesn't create these behavioral issues 99% of the time. The genetics of the dog creates these problems 99% of the dog. You have genetically fearful, insecure, anxious dogs, and you have genetically sound, stable, rock solid dogs, right? And your dog most likely falls into the category of the genetic fearfulness, the genetic insecurities, and that is the root of these issues, especially at such a young age, right? So again, wrapping this all up, first and foremost, you gotta forget that for a minute. We have the dog that we have here. We have an anxious dog for whatever reason, whether it's genetics, whether it's abuse, whatever it may be, that is the dog that we're working with right now. So what we need to do is we need to get the dog past the issues. Again, I look at specific issues, right? I look at the specific problems that I'm having or the specific things I'm trying to get my dog to do or not to do. And I look at behaviors. I don't look at past and all that kind of stuff. So to use your example here, getting in and out of the car. This is a really common one with most dogs. I worked with a lab Border Collie mix that's really young, like 6 months old right now, that the owners have had the entire life. And this dog, same deal, right? Would not get into the truck. I did a first session with this dog last week, right? You know what we did? We taught the dog to get into the truck by not making it optional. The problem and the reason why I'm pushing so hard on dropping the abuse part is because we get ourselves into this state of mind where, because we have inklings that that may have happened, we don't do the things necessary to work the dog past it, and we blame certain things for the reason why the dog is doing it, right? The first step for getting dogs past that issue, or we'll see this with a lot of times with stairs, or we'll see this a lot of times with dog getting onto a bed or a weird surface or something like that, is you have to make it non-optional, right? It is not an option for you not to do this right now, which means that starting yesterday, you need to make sure that never again do you pick this dog up to get into the car, right? So how do you do that? You use the leash, right? You don't beg the dog. You don't ask the dog to do it 17,000 times. You have the leash on. You have the leash attached to a collar that the dog cannot slip out of, so some sort of martingale or slip collar, because obviously if the dog is going to be thrashing and pulling and stuff, you know, they'll be able to get their head around it. So have the dog on a collar like that, walk up to the car, use that leash, pull the dog into the car. Get a little bit of a running start if you need to get the dog into the car. One other trick that I'll use sometimes is I'll physically get in the car myself, and I'm not gonna say anything, but I'm just gonna use that leash and I'm gonna pull the dog in, right? So you have relevant fears and you have irrelevant fears with dogs, right? Relevant fears would be things that actually are scary. It is relevant for you to be scared of this thing, right? Somebody running up to you really quickly, or an off-leash dog rushing up to you, or, you know, walking over something that is, you know, actually, I don't know, painful for you to walk over, or, you know, if you've had your nail quicked, you know, something like that, and you're really scared of nails or something like that. Those are relevant things, and those are things that I'm gonna ease the dog into, right? I'm gonna help them get over that fear because I know it actually is scary, and I know I need to give as much assistance as I can to work through those things. Irrelevant fears are things that I know are not scary. Irrelevant fears are things that I know are, you know, you have no reason to be scared of this. Nothing has ever happened with it before. There is nothing about it that is painful or traumatizing or anything. It's just something that for whatever reason the dog has in their head that they can't do, right? For whatever reason. Getting into the car is one of those. There's absolutely nothing scary about getting into the car. There's absolutely nothing scary about getting out of the car. Stairs are one of those. There's absolutely nothing scary about going upstairs. There's absolutely nothing scary about going downstairs. Walking over hardwood surfaces. There's nothing scary about those things. Any of these, walking through doorways, that's another one we'll see a lot of younger dogs that come in with, is doorways are terrifying. The fact that there's this thing swinging and that there's an opening and it's more narrow and stuff like that, very, very scary. So those are things that, because I know they're not scary, I have to work my dog through immediately, and I have to make it not an option. Again, I use a leash, I just go, right? I'm not begging the dog, I'm not trying to reward the dog for it, because they're just natural, excuse me, they're just natural, everyday things that the dog has to be able to do no matter what, right? So I work them past it immediately. We have had clients come in here before that live on ranches, or their dog has never climbed upstairs in their life before, and we'll take them, we have a second floor here, we'll take them and we'll just go take them upstairs to our kennel area, not even thinking of anything because the owner didn't tell us that before. And guess what happens? The dog follows us right up, because we're not overthinking it. We just go, and the dog follows because of that. We don't give him an option not to go because we're just moving, right? And the owners will look at us sometimes, they're like, oh my gosh, my dog has literally never walked upstairs in the last 2 years of its life. And they're like, how did you do that? We're like, we just didn't make it an option. You know, we just did it. So you have to look at things that way, right? Especially with stuff like this. And like I said, it starts by making sure you're not giving the dog a crutch anymore. You have to get this dog getting in. The first 2 or 3 times you do it is going to be a struggle. This dog is gonna give you a lot of fight for it, but you can't let the dog win. You have to get, like I said, get in the car, pull the dog in. You're fishing, right? I know the dog's 50 pounds now, so if you need, you know, Marty to help you out with it and have him get in with you and you guys both pull that dog in, just do it, right? I promise after the first couple of repetitions, it's gonna be a cakewalk for the dog once it realizes that you can do it. So again, kind of long-winded question there, but you have to be able to work towards these things. We are out of time. So we're gonna save these last 2 questions for part 2 of the video, and then we will combine part 2 of the video with this video, and then we'll post it all together. So until part 2, we'll see you guys next time. All right, guys, back here again. David with Miracle Canine Training. Answer your questions on the post. We are at 1 day later. Obviously, we got a little interrupted yesterday. We're gonna jump right back into these questions, keep cruising away with them. So next one is from Dana Mason. My pup is starting your program in June. Very excited. I can't wait, she's a handful. Until then, I'm watching all of your videos. I'm struggling with getting her to do anything she doesn't feel like doing. She will literally lay down on leash when she doesn't want to go in our home, growl when I tell her to get off furniture or go in a crate, which at one time she was trained to go in. She's only 6 months. Any videos helpful for these kinds of things? Couple of things to note on this question here. First off, obviously the dog hasn't been trained because it's coming to us for training, right? So once we have the training established, this stuff will be way easier. But the problem is you're still looking at this from an optional place, that these things are optional for the dog to do. And you're probably positioning yourself asking the dog to do these things when you have no means of enforcing it, right? So let's break down the 3 situations you described. So lay down on leash when she doesn't want to go into the house, growl when you tell her to get off of the furniture, or not getting into the crate here, right? So all 3 of those things are things we solve with dogs in literally the first day that they're with us. And it doesn't require all sorts of fancy schmancy training. It doesn't require all sorts of tricks and stuff like that that the dog needs to know, or different tools and stuff. All it requires is one thing, the leash. So 6-month-old dog, the good thing is that the growling and this and that, I'm sure isn't necessarily at the point where it's a hazard, where the dog is gonna bite you or anything, because it's pretty young. The dog is just protesting, right? So what you need to do is you need to make sure that this dog, essentially at this point, is always on a leash in the house, right? A dog that's growling at me when I try to get them off of the furniture, 1, doesn't need furniture privileges in general, right? And 2, needs to have a leash on so I can communicate these things non-verbally and clearly, right? So 1, make sure you have a leash on the dog. 2, make sure it's attached to a collar that will not slip off of the dog's head. A problem with a lot of the basic flat collars and stuff you'll use is if the dog pulls and thrashes at it, it'll slip over the head. So you want to get either a martingale collar, you want to get some sort of slip collar or a slip chain or something that's going to snug up as the dog pulls, not necessarily to choke the dog, but just to make sure that it snugs and then it won't fit over the head, right? So get a collar like that, put it on the dog, and start just doing these things. A 6-month-old puppy sure can get relatively big, but I would still bet that you are bigger than this dog. So when that dog lays down on the leash and doesn't want to go into the house, you don't say anything. You don't beg the dog to come in. You don't plead with them. You don't get treats and coax the dog over or anything like that. You put one foot in front of the other and you start walking. And no matter how much resistance you get from that dog, you do not stop moving until the dog comes in. The dog will probably buck around at the leash and throw a big tantrum and throw a fit, and you gotta keep going. And then you're gonna walk in and out of that door until the dog stops protesting it. This is exactly what we do with the dogs when they come here. This is exactly what I do with puppies that don't want to walk on the leash, puppies that don't want to go downstairs or upstairs. We work through the problem and we make sure that we are past it very, very quickly. The second this dog realizes that those antics don't work anymore, it will stop doing it, I assure you, and it won't take very long. It just has to start believing you that you're not going to, feed into this kind of stuff. Next, the furniture. Again, right now this dog shouldn't be on the furniture at all. So I would say anytime the dog's on the furniture at all, I would pull the dog down with the leash, particularly when the dog's growling at you. Again, furniture access, being on the bed, being on the couch, cuddling, things like that, those are all privileges, not rights. The dog is not entitled to be able to jump up onto my furniture. The dog earns those privileges with correct behavior, right? And no matter what, when the dog comes in for training with us, when that dog goes home from training, the first thing I'm gonna have you do is nip the furniture access in the butt for a little bit until the dog earns those privileges. So if you get a head start on that now, it's gonna help you way, 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 way more later on and make things way easier for you. So again, leash on the dog. Anytime the dog jumps on, don't even say anything. Just grab the leash and pull the dog down. The dog jumps back up, grab the leash, pull the dog back down. And you have to be more persistent than the dog is with these things in order to get them past the issues. Same concept goes for the crate. Don't make it optional. A lot of people walk over to the crate, they'll try to do it without the leash on, they'll beg the dog to come over, they'll throw treats in the crate, this and that. Just walk the dog over with the leash, don't say anything, push the dog into the crate with the leash, close the door, right? Again, no videos on this specifically, you just have to work through it. I promise you that will solve your problem. get your leash on your dog all the time, make sure there's some sort of collar the dog can't slip out of, make this stuff non-optional in your head as well as the dog. Moving on to the last Facebook question here. Is it possible to train a reactive and nervous dog to be around public and relaxed? Does it require constant attention, or can there be a day when you do not have to worry? This is a really good question, and it varies from dog to dog as far as the intensity of the behavior initially, right? So as far as just general reactivity, a dog that goes into public and makes a scene, barks at everything, pulls towards things and stuff like that, those are all extremely realistic things to totally do away with, right? One of my dogs before I got him was pretty reactive, right? Actually, two of them were very reactive initially, and now I take them for walks, and half the time I don't even have an e-collar on them because they're just reliable and I don't overthink it, and I can walk my whole pack of 4 dogs together and they're all good, right? Same with my clients. You know, we do away with the reactivity, we do away with the leash pulling, and we get them to a place where they're just compliant and reliable and they're smooth with things. Now, some of the 1%er dogs, as far as the reactivity is concerned, dogs that just are unbelievably reactive, and get it to a place where you know, you suppress that reactivity enough and you get them to a place where they're very reliable with it, but if you're not super on it, they will start to push the boundary again a little bit, right? Now that doesn't mean they're gonna revert all the way back to what they were before, but sometimes we will see that dogs will kind of take it to that next level a little bit. Yeah, I would say it's definitely realistic to work through those things. 95% of dogs, like I said, totally fine, totally over it, totally relaxed in public, no problem. 1% to 5% of those reactive dogs might be a little extra attention, but should still be so much better than it was before that it's not really much of a stress on you. The only exception to this is with dogs that have like really bad dog aggression issues or human aggression issues, right? Those are dogs that if you're out in public and nobody's coming up to your dogs and you're making sure you're keeping people away and stuff like that, it's not a problem. They'll be totally fine. But if I have a dog that has a history, particularly with human aggression issues, of, you know, human aggression, I am always going to make sure 100% of the time I'm on my A game when they're out around new people in a social context, right? My one dog was very bad with people when I first got him, and to this day, he's extremely fine around my guests, right? If I am there with him, right? If I am on it and I communicate the boundaries and communicate the rules, I use him in my lessons all the time. I use him, you know, I have him out when I have my friends and my family over and stuff like that. But if I am going to be not as focused as I'd like to be, if I am going to be in a situation where I'm having people come over and we're going to be hanging out and drinking, or I'm not going to be as focused, I put him away. I put him in a crate. I don't worry about it. Or if I'm going to be going to a really busy patio somewhere, I'm going to hang out with my friends, like, I'm not going to take him with me because I'm trying to enjoy myself and do my own thing. I'm not trying to go there looking at things as you know, always a training opportunity. I'm not going to be as focused and as diligent as I think I need to be. And personally, I don't have a problem with that. That has never inhibited his life. That has never inhibited my life. If anything, that's made our relationship better because he knows I have his back, and I don't put him in situations that are going to be too much, and everything's okay because of that, right? So a lot of people get this false sense in their head that their dog needs to tolerate everything, right? No matter what, they should never rehearse bad behaviors. They should always be super perfect all the time and stuff like that, and that's just not the case, right? So, you know, start to accept the fact that you're with your dog doesn't have to tolerate everything. They don't need to go to every single busy public outing, but that doesn't mean they're a bad dog. That means that they're going to be reliable. They're going to be safe with things when you're on your A game and you're supervising and you're good, but you never push them past that brink after that. So hope that answers your question. This is the end of the Facebook questions here, so we're gonna jump into the Instagram ones here next.